I was in Minnesota this last week, working with a client out there. The company had acquired 2 smaller companies, and now they were trying to integrate essentially 3 companies. And whenever you're going to acquire a company, sometimes you acquire a company that does the same work that you do so that you can just strengthen your own, position in the marketplace. Other times you acquire a company that does something totally different, but kind of in the same space so that you can then, capture more market share and grow the business. And the latter was what was happening with this company that I was at. And we did a really cool thing. We did a simulation that comes from Harvard based on this tragedy that happened on Mount Everest in 1996, where something like 11 people died. And when they look back on it, they didn't die because they were bad climbers or they didn't know what they were doing, but they died because people didn't speak up, and they died because there wasn't group dynamics that allowed for them to navigate the choices that had to be made. And so, as lots of schools have analyzed that scenario, they found that really everything was avoidable, but they really needed the group to work effectively as a team. So we went through the simulation, and it was pretty neat because each participant kind of played a role. One was a physician, and then there was an economist or an environmentalist. Sorry, not an economist. I don't know why they would be on Mount Everest. And then there was a marathoner, and then there was a leader, and there was a physician. So they had to navigate this simulation, working to scale and climb to the top of the mountain. And so it was really cool because the information that was given to each participant was actually, it wasn't all the same. And so when the simulation starts, everybody thinks they're all reading the same information. They're all getting the same details about the mountain or about the temperature or about how much oxygen they need. And the reality is that they're getting very different information. Not wrong, but just different parts of information. And so the simulation requires that they come together, they figure out, they pool all of the information, and then they actually have a discussion so that they can make the right decisions. And then they're graded by points to see how well they do, if they pass the challenges that have been given them. And the other interesting thing is that, much like in real life, they have personal goals as well as kind of the group goals. So individually, one guy, I think the marathoner, if he makes it to the top, then in the simulation, he gets $1 million, right? So some motivation for him to get to the top. Whereas some of the others, their motivation lied actually not in even making it to the top at all, but spending a certain amount of time to capture the right pictures or to clean up a particular part of the mountain. So really interesting as you see people go through some of those team dynamics. And certainly it's not isolated to a simulation. In real life and in real business, we often come across privately held information that isn't made readily available, that had we known, we may have done something different. And so we as leaders have to be able to draw that out. And so a couple things came out of that. And actually, that's what I wanted to share with you guys today, because I can't show you the exact slides and the data that we pulled for this company, but I did want to put together just really quickly some slides around kind of the central topic, which is that people are less likely to share privately held information or unique information because of different team dynamics. There can be political influences, there can be status influences, there can be lots of things that encourage somebody to say, you know what, this little bit of information, I'm going to hang on to it myself. And it goes both ways, right? Because we also look at other people and we say they know something. They know something about the company or the market that they're not telling us. And we make assumptions on that. And then that's where we get water cooler talk and people kind of sharing what they have or what they don't have. And it happens at different levels. But at the center of all of it was this concept of psychological safety. And I'm actually going to show you guys some slides because I think that will be, I just threw these together this morning. Pull that up. Okay, so you should see that now. I'm going to close this down. So this is the idea of psychological safety, which essentially is being able to show and employ one's self without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. So what that means is people feeling like it's okay to share their opinion, their perspective, their ideas, their mistakes, and not being afraid of the negative consequences. Somebody's going to come in and fire me, or somebody's going to yell at me or ream me out, or it's not going to hurt my position in the company. And so as leaders, as owners of businesses, as entrepreneurs, you sometimes might feel like your employees aren't telling you something. At the same time, they might feel the exact same way. And so in psychologically safe teams, people feel heard, they feel accepted, and they feel ultimately respected. And what that does is that does a couple of things I'll show you on the next slide. But ultimately, people have to feel psychologically safe for them to be able to make good decisions moving forward. So I'll show you just a couple. So without psychological safety, ideas aren't easily surfaced. People keep that to themselves because they think if I share something, then it's going to come back to bite me, especially if it's something that disagrees with strategy or it disagrees with the perspective or opinion of somebody higher up. And this leads to, again, concerns go unaddressed or ignored. People aren't willing to speak up. They're not able to go and say, hey, I saw this happen, and I think that might be an error for us, or that might lead to some problems for us. And of course, that third bullet, avoidable mistakes are made. And in the true Everest situation that happened in 1996, that was exactly what happened. You had some people that were higher up in the company or in the team who they felt like they had all the answers. And then you had people that were lower they were not as experienced climbers, and they wouldn't speak up. They had ideas, they saw the writing on the wall, they saw the problems, and they wouldn't speak up. And so avoidable mistakes are made. Certainly in business, in life, mistakes are going to happen anyways. And so it's just a matter of, are we making the mistakes that could have been avoided if we shared a little more openly? The fourth bullet there, hierarchy prevails and strategy ultimately stalls. When you have kind of a top-down hierarchy where the people at the top have all the answers and the people at the bottom don't, then it ultimately drives that to where people just become silent. And what's interesting about my experience there with this company is, when we were doing the simulation, we had a debrief with the simulation, and the whole point of debriefing the simulation was then to draw parallels to how does this apply as we try to now integrate 3 companies together, all aimed in the same direction with the same objectives and the same goals. And when we talked about the simulation, everybody talk, open up, sharing, laughing, enjoying it. And then when we shifted to, okay, now how do we talk about this integration? What are the challenges that we're facing with the integration? What are the difficulties that we feel as we try to bring new products to market, or as we try to bring these 3 companies together? And it was like crickets. People were silent, and it took a lot of work to kind of bring that out from them to where we started to finally hear some real concerns and hear some real issues, and then that puts us in a place where now we can move forward. So that next bullet, development and achievement is handicapped. When we don't really know what people's personal interests are, when their individual fears are, then we don't have the opportunity to support. There's a lot of research out there that talks about millennials, and everybody says millennials are very entitled and millennials just want it all. And what millennials really truly want is development. They want development and communication. But the research also shows that they don't actually ask for it. So you have these leaders who are like, I'm totally willing, but this person comes in and doesn't interact with anybody, or they just expect that we're gonna just give them everything, when sometimes the millennials, the younger employees, they just need to ask, say, hey, I would really love some help with this, or hey, I don't know what I'm doing over here, can you help me with this? And vice versa, leaders, being more involved and being more more focused on providing some of that development. So willing leaders, people who are really truly trying to help their employees, but they kind of don't know because employees aren't sharing. So that kind of leads to that next thing is loyalty decays and disappears. And when people don't feel like they can speak up or share their opinions, or they can't make mistakes, then they don't become loyal. And in fact, they feel like kind of a soldier or a pawn in this throng of people that can just be let go at any time. They feel less valuable. So loyalty decays and disappears, and that ultimately is a killer for productivity and engagement in a business, as you can probably imagine. And then lastly, effective communication is just highly unlikely to happen. We have employees with performance issues. We have leaders with strategic challenges, and bringing everybody to the table can sometimes lead to success. But if we don't feel like we can throw out an idea that might be received as kind of weird or maybe a different direction than what we've done in the past, then it makes it really difficult for effective communication to happen. People don't share, and then we don't have good ideas, so we kind of default to what we've always done. And so this is, without psychological safety, that those different kind of maybe weird ideas that will totally work, they might not come out. You'll definitely get some of those ideas that are crazy that won't work, but that's the idea of let's get it all out there. Let's figure out what we have as options, and then let's pick and choose and kind of head other things that way. So those are some of the challenges that come without psychological safety. So the next, what does it look like when we have psychological safety? Now, certainly you could take the previous slide and you could say, well, the opposite, right? But there's some things I want to point out. Trust, confidence, loyalty grow, because as people become more comfortable sharing and they see their leaders responding positively to mistakes or ideas or opinions, then that leads to that loyalty. They feel like they're a contributing part of a team, and that leads to them feeling like, hey, I want to be here. I want to be in a place where my voice is heard. There's an interest in my voice. The next is that collaborative conflict can exist. And this is really interesting because a lot of times we think of teams as being totally cohesive and getting along and having fun. But the reality is that we have to have some conflict. And we most likely don't have conflict if there's not psychological safety. And what was interesting from this simulation is some of the teams, they were totally getting along, having fun, but there wasn't really any conflict because in a few of the teams, and I was going to show you some slides, but I can't show you the exact data, but in some of the teams, they rated their team effectiveness incredibly high. And that was because they got along really well. Other questions were geared at, well, how much conflict was there? And they said there was none. But then the actual team effectiveness data showed that they weren't effective. They failed their challenges from the simulation, and they ultimately got the lowest amount of points. So that happens all the time when we don't collaborate and have a conflict of, I think we should do this, we shouldn't do this, here's my opinion, here's your opinion. Collectively, what should we do as a group? And with this team in particular, where they rated their team effectiveness very high, but their points were the lowest, they later said we would have been more communicative, we would have been more open about decisions that were made and about opinions that were held, so that they could have done better analysis on some of the data that they had to calculate to be able to pass the challenges. So collaborative conflict has to exist, and it has to be rooted in respect. It has to be rooted in, yeah, tell me what you don't like about this. That's totally fine. Let's have a conversation about it. Which again, psychological safety is not just something that leaders create for employees, although it starts there, but employees also have to create it for leaders. And so it's kind of this overall environment where we create psychological safety within an organization. The next is that privately held information is more openly shared. Some of the research that was shared, when I was working with this company, is that when they look at multi-person negotiations or multi-party negotiations, they find that often there's privately held information, right? There's what's called asymmetrical goals and purposes, as well as information. So, if we are negotiating and there's three of us, then I'm going to have probably different objectives than maybe you and then of this other third person. And so in multi-party negotiations, there's a lot of that going around. And so the better you can uncover and understand what's important to other people, then the better you can get to a win-win-win. But what's interesting about that research is that they find that research actually it's very applicable to team decision making. And that when people aren't sharing their own opinions and their own purposes and their own perspectives and objectives, then that they lead to worse decision making. So it's just so interesting that you think about multi-party negotiations, and then you think, well, we get together in a team, we have a good meeting, everybody's kumbaya, we leave, everybody's on board, but then we're not performing. We're not hitting our budgets. We're not hitting our objectives, and we're not performing as a team. And that can be because that collaborative conflict isn't there, and then also that there's not that information that's being shared. And then finally, the strategy and plans are more thoroughly vetted. When we get the perspective of everyone, then we're able to actually make better decisions because we look at it from more than just one perspective. So those are some things that are some benefits from having psychological safety. So you're probably thinking, well, that's great. How do I actually create it in the business? So I'm going to show you. So here's about 6 things. There's other things as well, but it starts with, and I said it earlier, it really starts with the leaders. Leaders have to show more vulnerability. That means admitting mistakes. That means explaining where maybe thinking was an error, or maybe where there was something done that was wrong, or a decision that was made that wasn't the right one, or maybe that you just don't even know. Showing that vulnerability encourages then others to do the same. The second is that you have to frame the work as a learning experience versus just tasks to complete. And if we're going out and we're saying, go do A, B, C, D, then people might go do A, B, C, D. But when it's a learning experience and there's a mistake made, or we have that opportunity to have a discussion about it, that leads to improvement over time. So try to pull away from, did you execute? Was it successful? Yes or no, to, hey, that's awesome. What did you learn? Or, hey, what are you seeing out there? Think about your employees that aren't performing and how easily we want to just go and say, well, they're not completing these tasks. But what if it was a learning experience for you as a leader? And you can go to them and you say, well, what are you experiencing? What are you finding most challenging about your role right now? And you can use the tasks to complete that are not being completed as kind of a data point. Hey, it looks like these 5 things aren't getting done. So help me understand what you're seeing so that we can figure out and help you get to where you need to go. So frame the work as a learning experience versus a task to complete. The next is level the playing field. So don't get so locked into, I'm the owner of the company, I'm the owner of the business, or I'm the CEO or the president, or you're just the janitor, or you're just an entry-level intern. Level the playing field. Allow everyone to have a say and a perspective in the work, so that you guys can come up with the very best idea possible. If you've got people that are going out into the field, they probably have a different perspective than you if you're, at home base most of the time or the majority of the time. So level that playing field. The next is be curious and ask specific questions. So much like I just described, when we encounter that employee who might be struggling, or when we're in a meeting with everybody, ask specific questions. Be very curious. Hey, what do you guys think? Let's say that you present your new strategy for the quarter, your new objectives for the quarter, whatever it might be. Ask your team, what do you not like about these objectives? If you had to add anything to this, what would it be? Or what are the reasons that this might not work? What kind of challenges might I not be seeing? What risks exist here? What data do we not have? What do we love about these objectives? Asking those specific questions can encourage people to come out of the woodwork and explain a little bit more of what they're thinking, how they're feeling. And even if you kind of open it up and say, hey, what are the three biggest negatives about this? And then I always tell my clients, when you're in those conversations and you ask those hard kind of pointed questions, then pause and just be patient and allow them to respond. And don't bail them out by saying, well, when you think of something, then let me know, or just send me an email later. So we want to know what people are thinking. And if you have to get even specific with who you're asking, say, Jenny, what do you think about this? What do you not like about this? What do you think we should do? Tom, what's the best thing that we can do right now? What do you think? Or Sally, hey, what data are we missing here? What holes do you see in our strategy or this plan or this idea that might make it not work, or that will really help it go? So again, being curious, asking specific questions. The next one is police the language. You've got to be so careful as a leader about the language that's happening. There's a lot of work banter that goes on, where, in my opinion, I think it's like a very mild form of bullying, where we kind of take shots at each other. And I think as a leader, you've got to be totally on top of it. I would, if there was any indication where people were actually pointing a comment at someone, I would be very, very quick to jump in and correct the behavior of the person who's pointing the information, and then defend the person who the information or the comment is being pointed at. Because no matter how small, I think that it matters. I think that it gets built up. So, when people say something like, why would you come up with an idea like that? Or, why would you have a harebrained idea like that? Or, oh, give it to so-and-so, they love donuts. Those are the types of comments that you as a leader has to be totally on top of, unless they're like admittedly like, hey, I love donuts. Everybody give me your donuts. But you have to be on top of that language that people are using to sometimes minimize other people. Because again, psychological safety comes from having total respect for everybody on the team. So police the language, be totally on the lookout. If it's as blatant as calling names, oh, you're an idiot, stop it immediately. I would always, if I ever heard something like that, I would say, hey, Mike, you're not an idiot. Bob, come on, man. We don't need to say that. And if it persists, then I would have more in-depth conversations, but police that language. The last one is celebrate courageous behavior. Those people who are in the moment where it's totally crickets and everybody's like, and they finally speak up and say, I don't like this idea. Or what if we did something totally different? Or I think this might derail our objectives, but what if we did this? Celebrate it. Hey, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Thank you so much for bringing that to the table. What does everybody else think? And giving that opportunity for them to feel like, hey, it's okay. Now, the thing is with these is that when you're creating psychological safety, we've got to recognize that if you haven't done this, if you've been guilty of saying, of being more of a point and go type of a leader, this is going to feel weird for your people. And they're going to be a little bit like, what's going on here? When is the other shoe going to drop? And you've got to be okay with that. You have to just be consistent in these efforts until people start to have it realize, oh man, this is actually for the good of everybody and the good of the company. I remember a long time ago when I started managing multiple teams, I had a team come into our group. And at that time when I had this group coming in, there was about 15 people on the team, and I had managed 4 other teams at the same time. And I'd gotten to this point in my career where I was literally every day when I came in the morning, I was going to every person's desk, which was about 45 people before we got this group. And so then when I got this group, I would go to these people, I'd say good morning in the morning and talk to them, see what's going on with them. and I would actually do it again at night when I would leave the office. And there's more behind that, but for specific reasons, I wanted to connect with people in the morning and before I left for the day. Well, this new team was not used to a senior manager coming around in that capacity. And so they were super nervous for like the first 2 weeks. And then finally, one of the employees said, you know what? People around here think that you're coming around to like check on us, but I think you just are interested in what we're doing and want to see how we are. And I was like, yeah, but it took 2 weeks and I had already been doing it with all the rest of my teams. But for this team, it was totally new to them. And so it took a couple of weeks before they even started to turn. And then, I had to be consistent with it even beyond that. So just be consistent, recognize that this is going to represent, if you haven't been doing these things, it'll represent a pivot for you. The last thing I want to say is that all of this list, we can totally change this in context from the workplace to your families. Showing vulnerability, framing life as a learning experience versus tasks to complete, leveling the playing field. Like, when was the last time that your kids, or you asked your kids, hey, how does it feel being a kid? Are you on the same level with them? Or are you saying you're the kid, I'm the parent? So level that playing field. Be curious. Ask specific questions. Like that question I just said. What's most difficult about being a kid? What do you think as my child, what do you think I should do better as a parent? When was the last time you asked that? Police the language. Hey, I mean, if you're a parent, you're probably doing a ton of policing. But ultimately, police the language. Hey, we don't talk like that. Why would we say that to someone we love? And then celebrating that courageous behavior. I recall my daughter just finished her first year of kindergarten. Maybe not her first year, hopefully her only year. But she finished kindergarten, and she had an experience in the middle of the year where there was a kid who was kind of a bully to her. And we talked about what she should do. And she went the next day and she stood up for herself. And she came back and we talked about what being bold meant. And she came back and she kind of told me what happened. I was like, McKay, that's being bold. You were bold. High five. And we just totally celebrated it. And she went bright red and she had this big old grin and she loved it. And even now, I mean, it's been, now, several months, even now she'll say, hey dad, was that bold? She'll do something. She'll say, was that bold? So we have that chance to bring it back up. So just remember that the psychological safety is not something just for work. It's not something that is only for your business. It's really applicable in all aspects of life, whether it be your home life and your relationship with your spouse, or with your family, or even your friends and the people that you interact with. How do we create that psychological safety? So the next thing is, you might be asking, well, how do I know if I'm doing it or not? So here's a couple things that you can ask yourself. When was the last time that you voiced your own mistakes to your employees, your spouse, your significant other, or your kids? Like, how open are you about mistakes that you've made? When was the last time that somebody came to you and gave you feedback and said, hey, I think I know what you're trying here, but this is kind of how it came off? Or, hey, how often do those around you openly offer their perspective and opinions? Are people really open? Are those closest to you, are they really open? Or do they kind of know where to steer clear of when they're navigating conversations with you, maybe around certain topics? And then lastly, how do you respond when people disagree with your perspective, when people have other ideas? When the janitor says, hey, I just overheard you guys talking, I actually have an idea about that. Or, hey, one of your employees says, I've got some ideas about how to market this better. How do you respond? Do you immediately go into, well, no, we're not going to do that because this is the strategy or this is the decision? Or do you engage in some of that, hey, thank you for bringing your ideas to me. I always want to know your ideas. Right now, we've spent, we're going this direction, but tell me how you think that fits into what we're already doing. Finding those opportunities to just continue to bring it up will create that psychological safety. So these are some good questions for you to ask yourself. If the answer is, if you haven't had a lot of experience where these things have come up for you, then I would really strongly encourage you to go to the people who work with you most often, who are most frequently around you, and I would encourage you to really ask some pointed questions. Hey, what am I doing well? What opportunities do you see in the way that I'm fill in the blank, right? Running the marketing business, or running the operations, or doing sales, or parenting, or even listening to you and responding, right? So be thoughtful about those things, and I promise, as you get consistent and really with a concerted effort trying to create psychological safety, you'll create it. And when you do have that, man, loyalty goes through the roof, engagement goes through the roof, productivity goes through the roof, and relationships just blossom. And you don't have to worry about your people leaving, 2 days from now, or 1 week from now, or a year from now, because they're locked in. They're a part of a team, and that's truly what I think people strive for and want.